Hey everybody, welcome back to my bathroom. Are y'all in the mood to get uncomfortable? Because that's probably what we're going to do today. Our topic is protests, which in its many forms is probably one of the most important aspects of human history. And it comes to us in a lot of ways. Like art and music have always been used as a form of protest. There is consumer protest, which is like voting with our dollars. There are pickets, demonstrations, walks, marches, and also aggressive uprisings and riots. But as the title states, this is going to be a brief history of protests, so we're just going to focus on the United States. And I will say I did think twice before making this video, because while the information that I want to present is readily available and easily verifiable, it pretty much gets ignored because, well, it makes us all uncomfortable. But in light of the growing amount of uprisings and protests in American cities over the past few years in relation to police brutality, I thought it was something to talk about. Because the media tends to condemn the actions of the protesters by saying they have to make sure there's never any property damage and they shouldn't cause so many problems and they should just be peaceful, be peaceful, be peaceful. But I kind of think that the conscious or subconscious underlying message to that statement is really, shh, stop inconveniencing us. But protests are supposed to be inconvenient. Actually, that's the whole fucking point of a protest. But people do still like to say that violence never works and peaceful protests are the only ones that have ever brought about any change. Well, this is the part where it gets kind of uncomfortable because history doesn't exactly support that claim. And there is one person that people love to point to when they're telling today's protesters how they should be acting, and that is, you guessed it, Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. And people like to say that everything he ever accomplished was only because of peaceful demonstrations, but it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And, you know, I like to think of it like if we have this whole historical bag of Skittles here, and you're only eating the green Skittles, it doesn't mean that there aren't still red and yellow Skittles in the bag that you're just ignoring. And that's just to say that it's really a lot more nuanced than saying that only peaceful protests played a role in accomplishing things in the Civil Rights Movement. And Martin Luther King himself said, "Riots are the language of the unheard. And we can't condemn the riots without condemning the conditions that caused them." So let's take a look back at the Birmingham Campaign of 1963, which is widely seen to be a major catalyst that led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that is because of the widely publicized photos of Commissioner Bull Connor's decision to use police dogs and high-pressure water hoses on protesters. But since they were being peaceful, how did it escalate to this point? Well, the protesters themselves were being peaceful, but some of the bystanders weren't. And a lot of them became violent and were throwing bricks, and that's actually what led to the escalation of the police dogs and the hoses and just how brutal those infamous pictures were. And that sent a clear message to the public that something needed to be done, and the violence was also able to be used as leverage by Dr. Martin Luther King. We see in his famous letter from Birmingham jail, in one of the paragraphs, he basically says, look, y'all can work with me while I'm being peaceful, or as you see, things are going to get violent in the streets. And he says, quote, "That is not a threat, but a fact of history." So it's important to say that Martin Luther King's main objective was to be peaceful, but, you know, violence and property destruction did play a little bit of a role in getting things done when it comes to the civil rights movement. And there are many protests that became riots in the United States that actually led to real change, like the 1992 Rodney King riots, which led to unprecedented change within the LAPD, the 1969 Stonewall riots, which began when the police attempted to unfairly raid a gay bar in New York called the Stonewall Inn, and rioters began to throw bricks and become violent. And that is widely seen to be the event that sparked the modern gay liberation movement that just last year gave us marriage equality. And there were also many food riots during the Great Depression that, you know, created the social crisis that led to FDR passing the New Deal. And in 1886, we have the Haymarket Riot, which became violent in the fight for an 8-hour workday. And that situation also definitely included some police brutality. And in 1921, we have the Battle of Blair Mountain, in which coal miners waged a violent riot in the fight for the right to organize into unions. And let's not forget the Boston Tea Party. That's a pretty important one, right? So I want to share 3 quotes with you guys, and all of these I will of course link where I got them below. And the first one is from Martin Luther King himself. It says, "It would be morally irresponsible to condemn riots without at the same time condemning the contingent intolerable conditions that exist in our society. These conditions are the things that cause individuals to feel that they have no other alternative than to engage in violent rebellions to get attention. And I must say tonight that a riot is the language of the unheard." And this is from another article. We need to clarify what we mean by terms like violence and peaceful, because to be clear, violence is beating, harassing, tasing, assaulting, and shooting Black, trans, immigrant, women, and queer people. And that is the reality many of us are dealing with daily. Telling someone to be peaceful and shaming their militants not only lacks a nuanced and historical political understanding, it is literally a deadly and irresponsible demand. And the next one is from Ta-Nehisi's article in The Atlantic, Ta-Nehisi quotes, which of course I'll link below. "When nonviolence is preached as an attempt to evade the repercussions of political brutality, it betrays itself. When nonviolence begins halfway through the war with the aggressor calling time out, it exposes itself as a ruse. When nonviolence is preached by the representatives of the state, while the state doles out heaps of violence on its citizens, it reveals itself to be a con." So this is not me enthusiastically recommending violence, but we can't deny the historically intertwined relationship of both violent and nonviolent protests when it comes to bringing about change. And yeah, protests can be cathartic and they can spread awareness to the people, but most importantly, they're supposed to send a strong message to the establishment that there will be unrest until there is justice. So my goal is not to change your mind or to advocate for violence, but it is to hopefully add another layer of depth to the lens with which you view current events. So until next time.